This is the second in a short series of videos responding to Liana K's gish-galloping rant to anti-feminists, to which I've linked in the low bar so that anyone can see what I'm responding to. The first video in the series is also linked in the low bar. In it, I've responded to approximately the first 2.5 minutes of the rant, ending with the promise to begin this one by addressing Liana's complaints about anti-feminists' criticism of feminism's rape culture narrative. And once again, as I said in the first video, Liana, I will continue this whether you acknowledge and respond or not. That said, let's get on with it. I have a video on feminism's rape culture narrative titled Rape a Dish Without Turnips, and I'm not going to repeat the entirety of it here. Instead, I'm going to link to it in the low bar for anyone who wants to hear the whole thing. What I will point out in response to your statements is this. Feminists are responsible for feminism getting criticized over feminist rape culture rhetoric. The claim that there is not an agreed-upon definition is made irrelevant by two things. First, a definition is posted on a site that 1. Advertises itself as a reference site, 2. Relies on consensus, and 3. Has been taken over by feminist initiatives like WikiProject Feminism. And I'll have some links in the low bar for that too. Even if some feminists like to word the definition in ways they think sound more politically expedient or add details, the basic use of the term by feminists always boils down to the same thing, and it matches up to that definition stated in feminist-run Wikipedia. A setting in which rape is pervasive and normalized due to societal attitudes about gender and sexuality. Second, you say that rape culture is a term that describes things which do in fact exist. This is an area where you come so close to being able to find common ground with anti-feminists, and then you blow it by failing to follow that up with anything rational. Societal attitudes about gender and sexuality have normalized two things: female sexual predators who attack male victims, and the use of society's protective attitude by women and girls to attack male sex partners with whom they are, for whatever reason, dissatisfied or disenchanted. The problem is, feminists as a movement, with no prominent exceptions, talk about rape culture as a thing male society imposes on women and girls. Their description of the culture includes exaggerating the incidence, impact, and significance of genderless experiences and treating them as if they only happen to women and girls, and only men and boys do them, or on treating unwanted sexual attention or contact as if its effect is different depending on the sex of the person initiating and the sex of the person receiving the attention. The term is often used by feminists to frame ordinary heterosexual interaction as malicious, with the male participant framed as a predator, and even an actively participating woman or girl painted as prey. It relies on the very gender roles that feminists claim to oppose, the guy being responsible for pursuing a gal's interest, attention, engagement, and consent, while the gal is expected to be reticent, hesitant, demure, and uncommunicative. Under these standards, a victimized man or boy may be treated as a willing, active participant whether he was or not. Feminist-led research on the topic, which has worked its way through various areas of academia and government to become the standard even at the United Nations, defines only as other sexual assault a female perpetrator's act of forcibly enveloping a male victim's genitals in a manner equal to that which is defined as rape should the sexes be reversed. Under that definition, a perpetrator who forcibly engages in coitus with a victim would be labeled a rapist if male, but not if female. No reason was really given by the researcher who came up with that standard in the first place. Only a statement that giving sexual assault of a man or boy the same label as when it happens to a woman or girl is inappropriate, one which describes his experience in active terms that would deeply offend feminists were they used to describe the experiences of female rape victims. Further, feminism's rape culture concept relies on something I described in Rape a Dish Without Turnips, moving the goalpost on how sexual violence is defined. Until feminists began pushing to change it, defining a sex act as violent misconduct relied on determining that the perpetrator deliberately contravened the victim's right or ability to refuse. Feminists have sort of covertly pushed society away from that view, which limits the meaning of sexual violence to describe intentional acts into a Simon didn't say mentality, wherein no attempt to contravene a refusal is required for a man's or boy's actions to be treated as predatory and violent. And criminal definitions, the legal process, and even policy at universities have all been altered based on that change. Finally, the phrase is used by feminists as a thought-terminating cliché to oppose any advocacy for due process, equal accountability, and rational skepticism where a woman's accusation of sexual misconduct is concerned. Nowhere is this more blatant than in the treatment of mutually drunk, mutually involved heterosexual sex as a male-perpetrated act of rape. This, again, is something which has been pushed into law and policy by feminist activists. You see, Liana, the problem anti-feminists and men's rights activists have with feminism's rape culture narrative isn't the label it's given. It's the narrative itself, and the discriminatory law and policy it has been used to promote. Once again, our focus is on equal consideration for and defense of human rights. Law, policy, and research on sexual violence should not use definitions and other terminology to make the sexes of the perpetrator or the victim determining factors in the degree of condemnation a perpetrator's behavior receives or the degree of consideration a victim's experience receives. Claiming it shouldn't be discussed or criticized because you don't consider it productive does not excuse you or any other feminist from responsibility for the damage feminists have done by using it to direct or even destroy discussion on the very real issues of marginalized male victims of female perpetrators, the erosion of due process, the incidence of false accusations, and feminist fear-mongering. When feminists stop using cries of rape culture as a shaming tool to try to silence men's advocates and push through discriminatory law and policy, and as a shaping tool to gender consideration for human bodily autonomy rights, we'll stop criticizing your use of the term. You then have the audacity to say anti-feminist criticisms lack substance. No, Liana. I think the real problem is that you've blocked everyone with substantive arguments so that you could surround yourself with easier targets and build your little straw men. Next, I have to point out, in response to your statement about criticizing kill all men comments, criticism is not a violation of your free speech rights. Free speech doesn't mean freedom from response. It means you can open your big mouth and shove your foot as far into it as you want, and the government can't punish you for doing so. It conveys no right to be exempt from anyone else's right to point out just as freely and openly that you did. As for arguments regarding kill all men, here you've once again mischaracterized anti-feminist response to these comments. There are two main anti-feminist criticisms of this rhetoric. One stems from being able to trace modern feminist terms like toxic masculinity back to the writing and beliefs of hate-mongers like Andrea Dworkin, who I know you hate hearing mentioned, but when she has an impact, she gets a mention. Dworkin's writing about masculinity is reflected in the work of Raewyn, then Robert, Connell, where feminist use of the term toxic masculinity originated. The influence of these radicals you would rather we anti-feminists would ignore is threaded through everything modern and mainstream feminists say and do, thereby associating your speech and your actions with those kill all men and male tears comments you'd rather the rest of us pretend didn't come out of your movement. The other is a criticism of the hypocrisy exposed by comments like those in the movement. Modern feminists fight tooth and nail for control over men's speech. Anything men say can and will be used against them in the court of feminist opinions. Feminism's academic establishment was quick to co-opt Dr. Chester M. Pierce's term microaggression, coined as a means of communicating that a minority listener's reaction to a statement outweighs and therefore entitles the listener to define the speaker's intent. Feminists have used that mentality to demonize any feminist disapproved speech by any man. Feminists have made all kinds of claims regarding the power and control conveyed by the ability of men's words to elicit a reaction from women, not to mention affecting social attitudes and changing the way people respond to women, like the way feminists claim rape jokes cause rape. And then feminists expect kill all men and male tears comments to be given a pass. Hell no! You don't get a pass! If you're part of feminism's thin-skinned brigade and you want those phrases dismissed as harmless humor, you're a hypocrite. You had to follow that up with another Darvo attack, blaming critics of radical feminism for the thin-skinned brigade's charge into hate rhetoric. Well, that's just another example of feminist hypocrisy. If criticism of radical feminist hate speech is a great recruiting tool for Radfems, what does that say about mainstream feminists, who upon hearing it said that kill all men is a rotten thing to say, get angry and decide to adopt the mentality behind it? What kind of person responds to, hey, assholes do this, with, oh, hey, I think I'll join them? What kind of person seeks out a sense of protection and belonging from a group that claims the opposite sex is a genetic mistake that should be corrected using mass murder and castration? Was that a tacit admission on your part that feminists are by nature inherently irrational and reactionary? And what do you think such rhetoric might recruit the rest of us into? Certainly not the ranks of your angry hate-mongering movement. Perhaps you should consider the possibility that your movement's anti-male rhetoric is another one of the reasons anti-feminism exists. And once again, because you keep repeating the fallacy, falsely conflating feminism's establishment and its powerful lobby with kill all men radical feminism does not exempt either the lobby itself or the nice feminist advocates who shield it from criticism. Attempting to use deflection to Radfems as your shield against that criticism only makes you responsible for having protected those whose activism has resulted in or is blocking reform of discriminatory law. Next, you cite horseshoe theory. Well, citing horseshoe theory in this discussion carries no weight either, as it's a fallacious argument to moderation in the context of two movements with unequal extreme ends and unequal moderate ends. The radical end of feminism advocates mass murder, mass castration, and slavery. The, quote, radical end, end quote, of male advocacy does not promote violence and at worst uses discussion of it as a means of highlighting social tolerance for female violence. At its middle, feminism is a push to reserve recognition of and consideration for human rights for only women and to put responsibility for the protection and promotion of that consideration only on men. Male advocacy at its middle is about degendering society's approach to human rights issues, protecting and preserving them without regard to the individual's demographic. At feminism's nicest end, the one that appears closest to having any compatibility with men's advocacy, the movement still takes a mostly gynocentric approach to politics, colored by a disapproving attitude toward the more rugged end of masculinity. The most moderate end of men's issues activism is also gynocentric and has actually been willing to adopt a feminist viewpoint with respect to foreign cultures, even going so far as to treat acknowledgement of male suffering as an attack on female victim status in some areas. The unequal nature of the two sides' attitudes toward human rights, gender, and each other kinda warps your horseshoe. Quite a bit, actually. The horseshoe effect becomes even more irrelevant if those on the feminist side of the horseshoe who consider themselves to be at the center strive to shut down critics of actual harm done by less centered individuals, by lying about their position on the horseshoe and accusing central critics of being at the horseshoe's other end. Drawing a false equivalency between promoting mass murder and criticizing promotion of mass murder does not put you in the middle or above the fray. It only makes you part of the problem. If you want to stop being associated with people you think are radicals, stop shielding them from criticism and start actively opposing what they do, instead of directing your energy against the people fighting for legal and social reform. I'll end this video with a final thought. You've talked a lot about how we should be working together. When will you be willing to meet that demand yourself? My next video will begin by addressing your statements about the men's rights movement and our grievances. And Liana, if you've actually bothered to listen to my criticisms, this is your trigger warning. I'm going to be talking about actual men's rights activist positions, not limiting myself to the straw man you wanted to attack.